Right, okay. Hello and welcome back to Elevenses with Kevin Williams. Apologise for the false start, or late start, I should say. I discovered I've been talking to myself for the last 30 minutes. So we are now live on air, I believe. All right, what have I got to talk about today? Well, okay, I've got a few stories, or one big story that I actually want to share, which I've just been, as I say, I've just been talking about for the last 25 minutes or so. But have we actually got any picture here? Judy, can you check? Sorry. It's frozen. Is it moving? Okay, I'm not sure whether this is going out or not actually. I've got a frozen picture here, so I really don't know if I'm actually transmitting or not. I'll give it another... You are? Alright, I'll give it another couple of minutes, and if it appears to work, then that's all well and good. Anyway, okay, so what do I want to talk about today? Well, first of all, the good news is the clocks have gone forward, so we're now into British summertime, which means we've got long evenings, and the real bonus for today is we've got an hour less to spend indoors. Now, a couple of little housekeeping points just before we go any further. First of all, by all means, make comments on the little chat thing that's popped up. I'll come back to those, of course, after I go off air. The other thing is I've got a URL to give you for one of the stories today, and I'll post that as well at the end of the show. So, what do we want to talk about today? I'm going to start off by looking at what's going on about parking permits. I'll just give you a bit of a warning about motorcycles and crashing at this time, and we'll also just take a quick look at the first MotoGP virtual race, which is coming up later today, 2 p.m. I think British time. First of all though, one question that's come up: will the government's MOT extension affect vehicle tax or insurance renewals? And the short answer to that is no, they can go ahead as normal. The database will show that those MOTs from the 30th of March, remember, have been automatically extended for 6 months. So you can go ahead and retax and reinsure your vehicle as normal. Everything will show up good. Don't forget though, if your MOT has just expired, or if you are it's expiring today or tomorrow, you must still or I think it's today actually, because I think the extension starts from tomorrow, so you must still get the bike or car MOT before you use it again. Okay, all right, so our attention's been drawn fairly heavily for the last few weeks to the coronavirus pandemic, but we must remember that there is other stuff still going on out there in the world, and it's easy to take our eye off the ball at this time. And here's what I mean. Now, this story actually broke originally right at the end of December. I first spotted it, and it was something I've been meaning to get back to, but other things got in the way. So it wasn't until I actually read a news story just today, in fact this morning, that I kind of revisited it and had to look to see what it was all about. And this is the proposal that Hackney Council have come up with to use emissions-based charging parking permits for motorcycles. Now, let's state straight away that motorcycle parking charges isn't a new thing. Westminster caused a big stir, and it was the best part of 20 years ago. In fact, I met somebody on one of my training courses back then who was heavily engaged in fighting Westminster's proposals, and I think in the end she had some success, and they were certainly watered down, I think. Anyway, so what are Hackney up to 20 years later? Well, they want to ramp the whole thing up by making it an emissions-based charge. Now, Why do they want to do that? Well, it's fairly obvious really when you think about it. On-street parking charges are huge money earners for councils. Why do councils need that money? Well, frankly, it's because that their central government has cut their grants to the bone. It's part of the austerity programme that the previous Tory governments have imposed. So the councils have found themselves very hard pressed for cash, so it's not surprising that they've looked to find income streams, and drivers have been a popular target. Up till now, motorcyclists have pretty much been left out, but Hackney are pointing to the fact that 7 other of the inner London boroughs already charge for bike parking. Now, Hackney at the moment has no charges. It's free to park in a bike in Hackney. But the proposals mean that it's not just the visitors who will need to park and pay and park. It'll be residents too. I've just been joined by the cat, and the hazard of trying to do things from home. Working from home, you also have the cat to come and see what's going on. And they're not talking just a few bob either. The proposals are that recent bikes, those with the newer emission standards, will be charged £60 for an annual permit. £61, that is, to be absolutely precise. Now, £61, Hackney is saying it's a £5 a week. Well, yeah, okay. But what if you don't happen to have one of the bikes that falls into the latest emission categories? Well, it could be then up to apparently £214 a year. So all of a sudden that £5 a week looks more like 15 plus. So, okay. What about if you're a visitor? Well, I presume this refers to people who want to park in residence bays rather than in bike parks, and that will be £4 a day, and presumably the resident will have to buy that for you. That's how it works with cars. And their final proposal is to charge £2 parking for all their motorcycle parking bays. And the reason for that is, they say, to discourage all-day commuting. So in other words, people who ride in to Hackney because they work there will find that they're being charged. Well, again, you can work it out for yourself, but that's going to be £10 a week. And over a year, that could be £500 a year to park near their place of work. And well, okay, how's that gone down with the local motorcycle industry? Well, it's not gone down well, as you'd expect. A bit like a lead balloon, in fact. Now, just to quote a couple of people who were reported on in motorcycle news, Andrew Almond, Bolt Motorcycles. They sell, it says, coffee, motorcycle clothes, and run mechanics workshops. He is quoted as saying, Hackney has a long history of motorcycling. Part of that is because Hackney is so poorly connected by public transport. I'll certainly second that. I'm also worried it'll put people off shopping locally. Why ride your bike round the area when you could go to Tesco out of town park for free? Yeah, good point. He's also echoed by George Dennison, who owns Moto Den, which is quite a well-known bike dealer, apparently the only one left in London, and also a local CBT provider. And this is what George has to say. This will wreck our business. We've been here 20 years and have 2 bike parking bays outside that are essential. 2-wheelers are the solution, but they're treating it like the problem. I don't understand why they're asking the same money as a car when you can fit 5 or 6 bikes into the same sized space. Well, okay, what's driving Hackney to do this? Well, apart from bringing in the cash, of course, the reason that's given is cleaning up air quality. Now, I do have some sympathy with that. My background at university was biological sciences, and my master's degree is actually in ecology. So, in principle, I have no objection to cleaner air. But the problem is, we have to separate out the benefits that could be accrued from cleaner air from motorcycle industry propaganda. And I will say propaganda. I know it's a controversial point I'm going to be making here, but the motorcycle industry says that motorcycles are the solution, not the problem. But does that actually fit the facts? Well, let's be frank. Firstly, bikes are not as clean as cars. It's just a fact. Look at the emissions standards. Every few years, the standard gets ramped down another notch, but cars have always been somewhat ahead of the motorcycles. So if you put a similar aged car and a similar aged bike next to each other, the bike is dirtier than the car. Full stop. Look at the standards. The argument that's usually advanced, though, to counter that is fuel economy. The argument is that motorcycles are more fuel efficient than a car. Again, is that correct? Well, it is if you're riding a small capacity motorcycle. If you're on a scooter, a 125 or 250, then you'll get better gas mileage than just about any small car that's around. Conventional car, I should point out. But by the time you get to a mid-sized bike, something like the two 600s that I have and I own, then it's not quite so clear cut. I've got a Honda Hornet and I've got a Yamaha XJ6, and both of them give me around about low 50s to mid 50s mpg. Sorry, I can't think in litres in terms of fuel consumption. Now, I also have access to my partner's Skoda car, which is a little turbocharged 1.2, and that reliably gets mid 40s. It drops a wee bit across town driving, but it's still surprisingly fuel efficient, and that's not even a cutting edge vehicle. There are small cars which give significantly better mpg than the Skoda. One of the things that has changed with modern vehicles is that car engines actually cut off at a standstill. Now, it's not a feature I particularly like, but it stops a car idling in traffic. So again, that argument that we often hear that motorcycles are more efficient because they can filter through traffic whilst the cars are stuck in a standstill with their engine running, that's not entirely correct either. The motorcycle's engine will keep running. If it's a traffic light, the car engine will be switched off. So again, the playing field is actually coming up in favour of the car. And what about hybrids? Now, recently did a couple of thousand miles in an Audi hybrid out in California. Now, two things struck me about it. Not only was it surprisingly nippy in petrol engine form and on the electric motor, I mean, it really did surprise me just how fast it got off the line, but the fuel consumption actually really took me completely by surprise. Now, remember, we're doing 2,000 miles, so obviously a hybrid, you run out of electricity fairly quickly, but it's a self-charging hybrid, and this gives it a bit of a benefit because every time you hit traffic, you just put it back into electric mode, and then you drive on the battery until you're out the other side of the town, and then you can go back to using standard gas. Going downhill, you can put it into recharge mode and it will use regenerative braking to top the battery up as you're going downhill. Normally you're just wasting that energy, throwing it out as heat from the brakes, but a hybrid will recycle at least some of your energy coming down the mountain. Now, we drove that car along freeways, not too much of those fortunately, up and down the mountains in the Sierra Nevada until we hit the closed roads signs anyway. And we also did several hours in heavy traffic, sort of typical standstill Los Angeles traffic. What was the fuel consumption over that 2,000 mile journey? Well, it was almost 65 mpg. 65 mpg. I can't get close to that on my 600cc motorcycles. So the argument that people use to say that motorcycles are cleaner than cars, I'm afraid we have to be very skeptical about just where that comes from. You know, it just doesn't hold up when you examine it in depth. So I honestly think that we have to look at cleaning up motorcycles. Now, it's something that we all should be thinking about as riders. And I'm going to point a bit of a finger here at motorcyclists, because if you have some kind of a cheap device attached to your bike which richens up the mixture because it makes it a little bit more snappy off the line, Or if you've done what a lot of riders seem to try to do, which is remove the catalytic converter from your exhaust system, then I'll be absolutely frank, I see you as part of the problem and not the solution. So think about that. You know, if we want to be seen as clean, we actually have to obey the rules as well. All right, but what about the negatives for motorcyclists? Well, I think they're quite significant. There is an impact on riders. The first thing I'll say is that the Hackney's argument that you can use public transport is pretty facile. Hackney not only doesn't have fantastic transport links, it really is a bit of a difficult place to get to. You have to think about how London's transport is arranged. A lot of the lines, tube and rail lines, for example, are radial. They go in and out of central London. If you do not happen to live on a radial line and want to get off on the same radial line, you've got a lot of messing around to do, 2 or 3 changes, possibly even bus journeys, and all that adds to the time and the transport issues of getting to work. Whereas what might be a fairly short journey on a scooter can take a ridiculous amount of time by public transport. I've been there, I've done that. I try to use public transport when I can, but there are many journeys which are just far easier on 2 or 4 wheels. So if the public transport doesn't go where it's needed, then people are going to want to get there, and that's when people use scooters and small motorcycles in the first place. So you're really penalising those people. The second thing I will say is that that £5 a week argument may seem like a small amount of cash when you think about it separately, but start factoring in the other expenses. Now, one of the biggies for people doing London is insurance. It's gone through the roof over the last few years in London, and that's partly thanks to the theft problem that we have here. But I suspect it's also insurance companies having to pay for losses in other areas. Floods spring to mind. So throw in that, and then throw in the road fund licence. Now, this is again something that motorcyclists tend to overlook, is that we're already heavily penalised by the road fund licence system for riding a motorcycle. Have a look at the charges for small CC recent model cars. It's often less than it is for a standard motorcycle. Now, whether that's fair or not, again, it's emissions based, is another matter, but it's a significant penalty already imposed on motorcycles. Central London emission charge as well. Think about that. It's currently the same for cars as it is for bikes. So all those people riding bikes, because they can at least park them in central London and leave spaces on the tubes to people who need them, they're being penalised already for driving and riding in. And the emission zone is going to extend out. Currently it's central London area, basically inside the inner ring roads, but as of I think it's 2021, I can't remember, I need to read the details about that, it's going to be extended out to the north and south circular roads, and that is going to affect a huge number of riders and drivers as well. Every time basically you sit behind the wheel or take hold of your bars, you will be charged to use that vehicle. So if you're a regular bike user or regular even driver, it's going to hit you hugely in the pocket. Okay. The other thing to remember is that most people who actually use motorcycles in London aren't using them either to get to work or for work. Very few people actually go for a pleasure ride in London. Maybe I'm a little bit odd because sometimes I do just go out for a ride around central London to see what's going on. But generally speaking, most people riding bikes are doing it for a good reason. So think too about why people use those bikes. We've said it's partly down to the transport network not being up to snuff, but it's also because many of those people using them are at the lower end of the wages spectrum. So fixing a charge like this is going to hit those people disproportionately hard. Now, I'm just going to take a sip of my mug. Any solutions? Well, it's not entirely clear from my quick reading of the consultation paper whether electric motorcycles will be exempted from these charges. If they are, that would be a good thing. But are electric motorcycles and scooters the full solution? Well, there are certainly affordable small scooters appearing, but when we get up to the bigger size motorcycles, they do have a premium price attached to them. The thing that I would say about this is that many riders of conventional bikes do worry about range. Well, of course, if you're just commuting 5 or 6 miles to work, it's really not an issue. You just charge it up at home and it will be there. It will get you to work and it will get you back again. For longer range stuff, then obviously there is still a problem with range on the bikes, although I have to say the zeros are getting close to being what I would describe as usable. Something else to think about, though, if you do go the electric motorcycle route, as the income stream from conventional internal combustion engines falls off, those councils are going to have to look for cash somewhere else, and the obvious solution is to start taxing the electric vehicles as well. So I don't think we'll be getting off scot-free at any time soon. Now, I'm going to put the URL up online in a moment, but I think it's worth thinking about this wherever you live. You know, people say, oh, but it's a London problem, I don't need to worry about this. Well, what London innovates, the other cities generally follow along somewhere behind. So I suspect that pretty much wherever you live, some kind of charging scheme is being looked at behind the scenes by your local council. It'll be a matter of when rather than if. Okay. All right, that's the main point I wanted to make today. That's taken up quite a big chunk of the show already. So a couple of other points that I wanted to cover. Please, if you are still riding your bike because you're in an essential service, please take even more care than you normally do. As I mentioned on the post on my page a couple of days ago, I was outside and the near silence was split by the sound of a loud exhaust taking off at high speed from a set of lights not far away from here. Now, that rider accelerating away certainly wasn't being circumspect in his riding, but just because there's less traffic on the roads doesn't take away the risks. Everybody is seeing less traffic, and that means that motorcycles are still vulnerable to turning drivers. All the reasons I go into on Science of Being Seen. Take care out there. You know, every time somebody is involved in a crash, it's another imposition on our hard-pressed NHS. I read just this morning that a rapper, sorry, I have never heard of you, Bugsy Malone, but he apparently had a serious crash on what appears to be a trike, and I've certainly read several updates from my news feed about fatal accidents in the last few days. So people are still out there, still riding and still crashing. Think about what you're doing. Think about the impact it's going to have on the NHS if you're taking up a badly needed bed. Okay, anything else to talk about? Well, the MotoGP, I just wanted to remind you about that. If you're missing your fix of biking, racing, I certainly am, head over to the MotoGP site, have a look online. I think it's at 2 o'clock this afternoon, 2 p.m. BST. I think we've caught up an hour now on European time, but double check that, I might be wrong. It's being streamed live on a variety of sites. It's a 6-lap race with a short qualifying session before, featuring some of the top MotoGP riders, and they're all playing virtually and racing around Mugello. So that could be good fun. Okay. Last thing, somebody asked me for a tip. How do you approach a student who says, I don't need to do that, I've never done it before, in 40 years of riding, I've never needed it. The issue in question was the need to make a blind spot check. Now, very quickly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but very quickly, what are we talking about with a blind spot check? Well, it's what we teach on basic training currently is what's known as a chin to shoulder check. So chin goes as far around as your shoulder. That's as far as it goes. So you're not turning your head more than 90 degrees. With a bit of peripheral vision, that actually opens up the view slightly behind you. But what it does is it fills in the gap that the mirror leaves. The mirror does a good job of showing you what's over your shoulder behind you. What it doesn't show you is what's beside you, and that's the risk. Now, I am aware that in some circles, looking over your shoulder has been actively discouraged. Why? Well, it's history. It's because back in ye old days, when you were learning to ride your motorcycle, you had to pretend it had no mirrors on. And then your rear observation, as it was called, had to be a turn of the head. And now it wasn't just a quick chin to shoulder look, it was actually a full look behind, a right over the shoulder. Now, motorcycles have been fitted with mirrors since the 1970s, but for some reason the DVSA, or the DSA as they were, only acknowledged the fact that there were mirrors on bikes in 1997, and suddenly there was a change of policy which allowed instructors to use them. But when I started instructing, which was a couple of years earlier, we still had to do the full look round over your shoulder look, and it wasn't a great idea in my opinion. In many cases people looked round at the wrong time, took their eye off the road, and there were tail end crashes. Even people following at sensible distances ended up looking over their shoulder at the wrong moment. Now, with the use of mirrors, you can get that view behind. You don't need to turn your head nearly as far. And one of the things that you can do, if you're going to make a shoulder check as well, to check that blind spot alongside you, remember, not what's behind, is you look in the mirror and then you carry that on into a quick glance into the blind spot. That's all you need. So the combination of mirror check and blind spot check takes barely longer than the mirror check on its own, and it certainly doesn't take anything like as long as the old rear observation right behind you. So, okay, that's brought the combination of mirrors and shoulder checks up to date. However, one argument that I hear fairly regularly is that we still don't need to look in the blind spot if we check our mirrors often enough. Sometimes it's referred to as mirror history. All right, now, problem is a mirror check is only ever a still photograph of what's happening. So I look in the mirror and there's nothing there. I look in the mirror again, there's still nothing there. I look in the mirror for a third time and suddenly there's something filling it. Where's it come from? Well, what's happened, of course, is it's moved into that field of view in the moments between my checks. Now, if it's in the mirror, there's always a chance that it might actually have arrived alongside me. And motorcycles are particularly bad for getting into other motorcycles' blind areas, mirror blind areas. And it's often very important to do a blind spot check before moving sideways across the lane. Okay. So that's why we need to do them. How do you persuade someone who is saying that for 40 years he's never needed one? Well, it could be luck. Think about crashes. If you were following my series on risk that I put up on recently, you'll remember that I pointed out that there are something over 1 million motorcycles on the roads being ridden regularly. And there are something of the order of 3,000 serious crashes every year. Okay, so do the sums. That means there are 999,000 and all the rest motorcyclists who don't crash. So even over a 40-year riding period, it could be that we simply got lucky. That every time that we moved across a lane, did a lane change, every time we took an exit off of a road, there was nothing alongside us, simply because the odds hadn't stacked up against us. How do you get that over to somebody? Well, think about a coin toss. If you toss a coin 10 times in a row, the chances are that you'll get 5 heads, you get 5 tails. Okay, everybody understands that. But here's something that a lot of people don't grasp. If you toss a coin 9 times and it comes up heads every single time, what's the chances of another heads on that 10th toss? The answer is actually 50-50, because what went before doesn't affect what happens on that next toss. So we could be staying safe simply by luck. We don't know. The tails might not yet have occurred. Doesn't mean it won't next time out. So basically, if you are getting away with not blind spot checking when you're changing position on the road, it might be your exceptional mirror skills, or it may be that simply nobody has put their vehicle into the blind spot at a moment when it became critical that you knew about it. So I am always in favour of a bit of belt and braces. Mirrors, by all means, yeah, use the mirrors, know what's going on around you, get that situational awareness, but be aware that between those snapshots in the mirrors, our situation can change in a moment, in a flash of the eye. So fill in those blind spots with head checks where it makes sense. Okay, so all right, that was answering John Long, who queried me on that after the last show. Now I've probably overrun today, but hey ho, never mind. I'll be back tomorrow at hopefully 11 if we get no glitches with the presentation. So if you've got any questions about anything that you want to know about, drop me a line. You can fire it off in the comments section there, and I'll get to it in a minute. And I'll try and bring it in tomorrow. So hopefully 11 o'clock for Elevenses tomorrow, and I will be signing off now, but we'll see you again soon. Don't forget, if you've enjoyed the show, you can pop over to my coffee page, and you can support me on there. Price of a cup of coffee would be gratefully received. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. All right, bye for now.